A cannon roars from the citadel of Calais, France, blasting smoke and sound out over the English Channel. The crowd cheers, celebrating the momentous event they've all gathered to witness, because that shot has not been triggered with a gunpowder fuse, but rather by an electric pulse sent from Dover, England, along a wire that's been laid along the bottom of the narrow channel separating Britain from France. Later that day, a return signal from Calais sets off a British cannon at the gates of Dover Castle. On November 19th, 1851, two nations are linked by an undersea cable for the very first time. The Times of London declares that this conquest over the waves must ever remain recorded as amid the greatest of human achievement. But some men are already envisioning a grander feat by asking a question. If a telegraph cable could bridge the English Channel, could one span the Atlantic Ocean? Thanks so much to Factor for keeping us history-loving beans well-fed fast. The arrival of the telegraph in the 1830s was nothing short of a revolution. For millennia, messages could travel no faster than the speed of a horse or sometimes a bird. But by harnessing the power of electromagnetism, messages could now cross entire countries in mere minutes. And it caught on quickly. Between the opening of the first commercial system in 1837 and the laying of the Channel cable 14 years later, almost 30,000 miles of telegraph wire had been strung across Europe, Britain, and the United States. Now, news, diplomacy, and gossip all worked at the speed of electricity. But oceans remained a barrier. While paddle steamers and propeller ships had cut travel times significantly, it still took around 12 days for a letter to cross from London to New York. And it was that limitation that Frederic Newton Gisborne, an Englishman who'd settled in Canada, was determined to remove. A self-taught electrical engineer, Gisborne imagined a line that stretched from the west coast of Ireland to the east coast of Canada, uniting two continents by the miracle of telegraphy. So in 1852, he set out on the first stage of his plan, to lay an undersea cable from New York to St. John's in Newfoundland. I was looked upon as a visionary by my friends, he later recalled, and pronounced a fool by my relatives. And 2 years later, it kinda seemed like his relatives had been proven right. His cable, bought in London from the makers of the Channel cable, had broken on the rocky seabed, and he only managed to stake 40 miles of overland wires in the frozen wilderness of upstate New York. Gisborne was now $50,000 in debt and facing prison on charges of fraud. So in desperation, he looked for an investor to keep his dream alive. And he found one in Cyrus West Field, a 35-year-old paper magnate. Despite having no knowledge of telegraphy or oceanography, Gisborne's vision of a transatlantic cable would become Field's obsession. He began by forming the Cable Cabinet, a group of investors, scientists, and engineers. Among the first members was actually Samuel Morse, the co-creator of Morse code and the inventor of the telegraph system used in the US. While Gisborne was the company's chief engineer, it was now pretty clear that Cyrus Field was now the driving force behind the project. By the end of 1856, Gisborne's line from New York to St. John's was complete, though at the steep cost of $1 million. And this would prove to actually be the cheapest part of the enterprise. For that same year, Field ordered 2,500 miles of cable from two British companies, which was loaded into the holds of the HMS Agamemnon and the USS Niagara, loaned to Field by the British and American governments. But due to its colossal weight, the two warships had to share the cable between them. Tossed about on the Atlantic waves, the line broke on the first day that they set out. It was grappled up from the seabed and fixed, but broke again just days later. This time, with 300 miles of cable disappearing into the depths. Undeterred, Field tried again in May of 1858 with a new plan. The Agamemnon and Niagara would meet in the middle of the Atlantic. There, they would splice their two halves of the cable together and then set off back toward Ireland and Canada, laying cable as they went. Despite better unwinding mechanisms, a violent storm engulfed both ships, and the cable broke 3 times before the attempt was abandoned. After this second failure, many investors mulled cutting their losses, yet Field's optimism managed to keep the project going. On July 29, 1858, the two ships rendezvoused again and spliced cables for a third attempt. This time, the conditions were good, and the USS Niagara made landfall at Newfoundland on August 4th, and the following day, the HMS Agamemnon reached Ireland. The cable had been laid. Then, on August 16th, 1858, the first official message was sent along the line. Directors of Atlantic Telegraph Company, Great Britain, to directors in America. Europe and America are united by telegraph. Glory to God in the highest, on earth peace, goodwill towards men. Jubilation marked the front page of every newspaper. Bells were rung, flags flown, and New York held a parade. Heck, even Tiffany's department store sold unused pieces of the Great Cable as jewelry and decorative furniture. Because, keep in mind, they were celebrating not just a technical wonder, but possibly a new world order. Many believed that this new era of communication would usher in world peace. The laying of the telegraph cable is regarded as the greatest event of the present century, said one writer. It is impossible that old prejudices and hostilities should longer exist while such an instrument has been created for an exchange of thought between all nations of the earth. Yet, even amid the celebrations, there were actually grave problems with the cable. First off, the quality of the signal was terrible. Queen Victoria's message of friendship to President Buchanan, sent on the first day, took 17 hours to transmit 98 words. Worse, it was clear that the wire was already degrading. On September 1st, the same day that parties erupted in New York, the city actually received its last completed message from Britain, and by October 28th, the Great Cable was pronounced dead. Henry Field, Cyrus's brother, commented that, "The wonder's not that the cable failed after a month, but that it ever worked at all." News of the cable's failure caused uproar on both sides of the Atlantic. In New York, the festivities were replaced by bitter recrimination. Investors were furious. Some even accused Field and his company of fabricating the project as part of a stock market swindle. Adding fuel to the fire, the next year a 3,500-mile cable intended to connect the Suez Canal to Karachi also failed, meaning no one was in the mood to burn more money in pursuit of Field's dream. In fact, it was 7 years before Field could try again. After waiting out the Civil War, he formed another group of investors and purchased a new cable in 1865. By then, cables crisscrossed the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, providing valuable experience for how to pay out the immense weight of thousands of miles of copper and iron. Also, the science of telegraphy was better understood, and superior wires were available. Transmission times had dropped to 8 words a minute, which is much better than 2 minutes per letter that Field's first cable had managed. So in July of 1865, the SS Great Eastern set out with the new cable. And if you've been following for this entire episode, you won't be surprised when I tell you that predictably things went wrong again. After laying over 1,000 miles of cable, it snapped, disappearing over the end of the ship. But man, Field could just sense that he was getting close, and managed to gather yet more investors for another attempt in July of 1866. This time, the Great Eastern steamed across the Atlantic, the Great Cable unspooling smoothly over its stern. And then on July 27th, the connection between Britain and North America was re-established, and it would remain in place and in use for the rest of the 19th century. And although his grand project was finally complete, Cyrus Field had one last marvel up his sleeve. Later that year, several ships set out toward the site where the 1865 cable had been lost. With grappling hooks on the end of heavy ropes, they trawled the bottom of the ocean 2.5 miles beneath the waves. And despite astronomical odds, they found the lost cable, hauled it aboard, and it still worked. So they spliced on a fresh length of cable, and now there were 2 telegraph lines crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Though soon there would be more. Within 5 years, cables would reach places as remote as Japan, Hong Kong, Brazil, and Australia. For the power of the telegraph was immense. Governments could keep watch on their far-flung empires. Stock markets could be rocked by news of a drought in India or a particularly good harvest in Virginia. Friends and family separated by thousands of miles could keep in touch, and a constant stream of news could hum along the web of wires, feeding the public's insatiable hunger to hear what was happening in every corner of the globe. Like the telephone and the internet that would follow, the telegraph changed the world, conquering not just distance, but time itself. Actually, in my modern life, traveling needless distances and wasting time are 2 things that I actively try to avoid. And you know, with great tasting fast and fresh meals delivered right to my door, no one helps me on the food front in that regard more than Factor. In my opinion, Factor is just the best ready-to-eat meal delivery service, and I've been using them for over a year now for just tons of amazing lunches and dinners. Each of their meals is ready in 2 minutes with no prep, no mess, and no cleanup. Just great food ready for me when I have time to eat it. Pretty straightforward. Every week, I review Factor's rotating menu menu and pick what I'm feeling from their tons of meals and add-on options. Actually, I just got hooked on their new wellness shots and I've been kicking off my mornings with those, maybe a little too extremely as you can see here. And because they have so many options to choose from, I can always be sure that everyone in my household is gonna get the food that they love fast. Like right before I recorded this, I had their ground pork cheddar chili mac. And oh yeah, that hit the spot. And because I saved so much time, I was able to wrap up work early and got to have a relaxing evening with Jamie and catch up on my new obsession, the Great British Baking Show. And I swear to you here and now, one day that Hollywood handshake will be mine. Also, a high five from Prue would be nice. But until then, you can get your first Factor box for 50% off at factor75.com by clicking the link below and using the code EXTRACREDITS50. So it's tasty task time. Get fast and flavorful meals for 50% off that you'll love here, and once dinner is decided, check out our next savory selection here. The biggest bean thanks to Ahmed Ziad Turk, Angelo Valenciana, Arclight Games, Dominic Valenciana, Izzy Coin, Joseph Blame, Kuya Koi, and Michael Hoggett for being our legendary patrons.